all the way from the UK just for you guys. No other reasons, right? Not quite. So we're going to spend half an hour talking about a building effectively that I think really starts giving us some ideas about the potential of what can be achieved. It's a really good story, but it's a story about people. And Nick just mentioned earlier that really we talk about technological enablement, but ultimately a lot of what we do is about changing how we work in space. We've spoken a lot about sustainability, but there are two pieces to this, right? There's obviously the reduction of carbon, but there's also how we create space for people to consume, okay? And if we don't drive both a thinking around how we reduce carbon and how we create space that people want to be in, we miss the point of technological enablement. So for us, when we talk about buildings and we talk about the technology associated with buildings, we have this little 4-pillar starting point, and everything we do, and you'll hear a common message coming from Schneider when we talk about buildings and we talk about what we're doing, it all comes back down to this, right? But in essence, when we think about things, we want to be thinking about how we create spaces for people. Our previous head of real estate always used to say it needs to change from fitting people to space to fitting space to people. You don't want to squeeze someone into something that works for you. You want to create something that works for them. We want it to be resilient in the sense that it can be usable regardless of conditions, that we can drive a really efficient approach to things. Okay, and we can be responsible in that space. So when we put these 4 pillars in place, we start having a building or an environment that is effective in how it works. So the building we want to talk about is Sidara's head office building in London. Anyone ever heard of Sidara? No? Okay. So they are a house of brands, headquartered originally out of Beirut. Okay, they own some of the world's largest design construction businesses, architects, interior architects, cost management consultants, project managers, smart consultants, analytic platforms. And what they did was they started a project to think about how they could redefine themselves as a business. So as you can see, 21,500, nearly 22,000 people in the organization now. And one of the things that's interesting is it is wholly owned. There are no investors in this business. It is owned by one guy. So really significant. But what they did is they looked at who they were and they looked at their legacy. They looked at where they were and how the market had perceived them. And so they went through a process of first rebranding. So they went from an organization called Dar al-Handasa to Sidara. And they went on this journey to create a new building. Now, what's really interesting about this is they, being a house of brands and being in the design sector, they went to their companies and they said, guys, design us a building. They went to the architects and said, here's a plot of land in the middle of London. The building is called 150 Holborn. So as you can guess, the address was 150 Holborn. They told them what they could do, height restrictions associated with that part of the city, how many people they wanted in it, and they let them loose. Once they'd finished the design, they said, oh, by the way, boys, you're also going to be the tenants in this space. So the people who designed and built the building are also the people who are in the building as tenants. And we go one step further because ultimately being a house of brands, each of these brands is still operated as an independent building. So while it's owned by one company, they have, I believe now, 9 of their organizations all in the same space as a multi-tenanted space. Where they began was consulting. They sat down and they started talking to the organization and said, what are the things that are important to you? What do you want this to be? And these effectively are the 8 things that came out of those conversations. So again, one of the things that's really interesting is they created a space using their own organization to do so, but used it as a mechanism for change. They used the process as a way to draw organizations together and have people all operating in the same space. They used it as a way to create corporate culture. Okay. And as you can see here, there's a lot about not only how the building is going to work, but how it's going to serve its community. Okay. So once they'd effectively designed or identified and established the basic principles for building a building, then they went to the normal process of starting your design. And the first place they stopped and did thinking that was basically said they had to acknowledge the complexity. They can't just pretend that there's no complexity because they don't want it to be there. So you acknowledge the complexity, not only in the build and design, but also in what you're trying to create. So they laid out specifically all the different elements of what they were building, and then drew the teams together and said, okay, how do we do this together? An interesting conversation this morning, because a lot of people within organizations are still focused on creating silos, creating mini little kingdoms. And quite often we separate out the functions from each other to service our desire to create a independently operating space. And we fail to pull things together. And it is in the uniting of things we can drive value. So specifically, one of the things that they looked at in the complexity was how you take the foundational operation, mechanical and electrical operation of a space, and how you combine that with the business of the building. Okay, so typically we'll look at OT, and then we'll look at IT, and then we'll look at finance as three completely separate functions, responsibilities. One of their first things to do was to break that down and say, actually, we have a community in a space. That is my business unit. Everything within that can be siloed for function, but it has to be porous. We have to allow those silos all work together in a transparent and simplified way to create something that works better. Now, if we fail to acknowledge complexity, and if we fail to think about what it means, then ultimately we're going to end up with a partial solution. We have to be brave and step into the thinking around complexity and the embracing of that. So one of the foundational concepts was ultimately this. If you want, and we're not going to use SMART. I don't know about you guys, but SMART doesn't really mean anything, okay? If I asked everyone in the room what a smart building was, we'd get 400 different answers, and there are not 400 people in the room, right? So in real terms, what we step back to say, if we want to be able to operate intelligently, what do we need to do? So the first thing that is acknowledged is this. We need to digitize. We need information. So we've got to effectively, stage one, capture and normalize all our operational data. I don't know if you guys were in the session a little earlier with Nick, but he was saying only 6% of the businesses that we work with our field engineers, have access to analytical information from a mechanical and an electrical standpoint. So in real terms, if we want to see change and if we want to drive something different, we got to begin at the foundation and say we need data. Once we have data and we know what it means, okay, because just data by itself is not helpful, we need to be able to, on a regular basis, accept that information in an organized way. Then we need to analyze it. And lastly, we have to act. So Schneider has been in the business of analytics, Nick, keep me honest, but probably 15 years, maybe more. Okay. If you go and look at the single biggest failure in the analytics space, anyone want to hazard a guess? What goes wrong with analytics? when you fail to act on advice, you don't generate value. So an analytical tool, or the access to the information, the access to what it means, the understanding of the relevance of this, has zero value until the built world changes because you've acted on it. Digital is fine. It's important. But its importance comes out in how the world changes because of it. No physical change, no value. Yeah? Or we don't agree? I think, honestly, just a pretty picture, a great dashboard, wonderful. And people buy pretty dashboards. I'll show you right at the end of the presentation. We got some amazing ways to look at things. People buy that. But then how you put that into action and how you use that to change can be very, very difficult. So what we did with the Sidara team is effectively to look at all of the operational subsystems in the building. Everything. Okay. Mobility. Well, we have bike racks. This office is in the middle of London. You don't have a car, but you do have a bicycle. So how are you going to get in and out of the office? How are you going to experience it? We looked at access control. We looked at lifts, all of the subsystems. And then what we did is we tied it to how you manage the business of the building. So just technological enablement or technology in a space does not necessarily help you until you understand how that technology helps the business of the building deliver. It's really interesting when we talk about maintenance of a space, because there's a new principle being thought through from a European standpoint. We all started with break fix, right? Run it, break, fix it. Then we moved to PPM, go and do some stuff that will prevent it breaking quite as regularly. Then we moved to the space around condition-based maintenance, all right? And really that's the technological enablement of operation, so we can start predicting when things are going to fail, okay? And when you look at the numbers, Nick put it up on the board, 21%. A lot of the research we've looked at is anywhere between 15 and 23%, right? Depending on the country. So it's actually still a relatively low number of customers that are using this stuff. But there's some new thinking that's starting that asks a fundamental question. What is the purpose of my business? What is my business going to do? Answer that question first and then decide how to maintain your infrastructure. Because what that thinking does is it allows me to focus where I put my energy in order to achieve the optimum results to support the business of my building. Okay? So the term is objective-based maintenance. The question is, what is the objective of the business? The answer to maintenance is how my maintenance supports my business. It's a really big change in thinking, but it's just extremely powerful. So when you start looking at combining what we traditionally call a smart building with operations, we believe that we can create what we'd refer to as an intelligent operation. And you can do this at scale. Okay, we take individual buildings, we combine it with a portfolio management process, and you can then start getting to a point where how you're operating the space across multiple buildings allows flexibility and intelligence in operation, which allows us to start driving a reduction in energy and improvement of experience, all of these kind of things. Okay, so effectively what we did is we picked out a number of use cases. Now, one of the key thinkings here, and again, I find this really interesting, we've come from a place where people said, let me collect all the data I can find and just give me all the data in the business, all the data in the build. Just give me everything. We'll figure out what to do with it later. Anyone heard this before? Yeah, I'll just collect everything. How many people that you know have gone back, looked at the data they collected and figured out what to do with it? Pretty much no one. Okay. Fundamental reasons. Firstly, we don't organize the data in a way that's understandable. We don't categorize it. We don't drive timestamping. We don't drive tagging, so you can't understand the structure of the data. Then ultimately, it's unusable. You just have a lot of data. Data is expensive. Okay. And actually, there's some interesting experiments that have done which can physically quantify the mass of data. So it physically weighs something. Okay. Not just in your pocket, but, physical weight. Far better for us to step back and go, what are the kind of things that we want to achieve? Let's think about the direction of the kind of data that might support something we want to do in the future. So start to constrain what we're looking for. And we identified effectively 6 areas that we thought we could work that could drive specific value. So these 6 specific things were really interesting because what we started looking at is how do we drive experience, how do we drive a reduction in energy, but an improvement in how people are experiencing the space. And I'm just going to pull out 2 specific areas that I thought were really interesting. The first area, is around facility maintenance. So in real terms, what we had to look at is we have a PPM schedule. Great. We know what we're going to interact with. But we actually want to start looking at how do we prevent failure? How do we start looking at improving the operation of equipment, extending asset life, and reducing the energy required to operate the building? And we did this from day one out the door. So we applied fault detection and diagnostics at commissioning. And then we took one step further because what I mentioned earlier is a reality around analytics. If we don't act on this stuff, we have no value. So what we did right out the door was combine analytics and work order management. So effectively, take the insights and the recommendations from the analytical package, drive that straight into the work order management system, and decide at that work order management point what needed to be actioned. So effectively think about things as a micro business case. For every insight we extract from the analytics tool, we look at what is the impact to people's experience, what is the impact to the health of the equipment that's operating, and the impact to the cost carbon of the specific fault that we've identified. And then we look at the cost of intervening and fixing it. So net cost is lower than the savings I can make. Let's go and do that. Okay. And what we've done is drive that directly into a field engineer's normal day task. So what we found when we first tested the thinking was as soon as I identified and created a work order that was specific to something other than what I did every day, people ignored it. I'm busy with this stuff. I've got other things to do. I don't have time to look at something that's not a direct measure. As soon as we changed the process and just added a line item to their work instruction, guess what? It all got done. No mess, no fuss. Because now it's part of my day-to-day process. I'm not in a position where someone has to ask me to do something extra. Okay? This is a very, very powerful process for us. Okay? It's in operation, and what we found since we did this deployment, there are a lot of people starting to ask the question of how you take analytics and work order management and combine them. The second use case I wanted to highlight, really clean, simple one. Traditionally, we like to talk about the optimization of light and space based on occupancy sensors, right? Walk into a room, if someone's in a room, we turn everything on. If there's no one in the room, we turn it off, and we call that smart. Okay, I guess it's not dumb, but what it does is it creates a really crappy space to be for the first 15 or 20 minutes of the time you're using it, because actually the air's not been circulating, it's probably too warm, too cold. Yeah, your light's fine, but it's not great to be there. So we asked the question, what if we change the thinking if I know you're going to be in the room, let me turn the lights on. Let me cycle the air. And we did some experimenting, and 20 minutes is about perfect. So 20 minutes before your meeting starts, we cycle the air, we bring your lights up to 50%, and you crack the blinds 50%. 3 minutes before the meeting starts, we wrap the lights up, open the blinds. And then 5 minutes after you exit the room, everything shuts down. Pretty cool, right? Not complicated. This has been in operation for a year. Anyone want to hazard a guess as to the energy reduction we've seen? So without negatively impacting people's experience, but what kind of energy reduction per room do you think we see? Just on that action. More aggressive than me, but 22%. So 22% defined energy reduction without negatively impacting the experience of space. And that is just thinking about what I know and doing something about it. The other thing that we found in this process is the more we automate, the greater chance we have of being successful at creating experience and reducing energy. The more we leave manual, the higher the likelihood that we're going to have some challenges. So, I'm going to play a video for you quickly. We have a converged central network within the building, which means effectively, while it's all multi-tenanted, we have one IT infrastructure, which all tenancy runs from. We've done some work with connecting all of this thinking to access control, sensors for people count and all of these things. And so one of the things that came out of these journeys and the adoption of technologies was simply this. We often think in a very linear format. So I've given you 2 use cases, okay? And those 2 use cases are very specific to one action. But one of the things that we've started doing is saying, when we adopt a piece of technology, let's identify multiple ways you can drive value from it. We have to get away from a one-to-one relationship on technology investment and move to an exponential return model. So we need to start thinking about what does it mean if if we think about the use case associated with maintenance infrastructure, right? What else can we do with that information? Well, effectively what we have done is we have connected the operational analytics to the financial asset register. So at a financial level now, you can have a look at your building and all of your plant equipment, and you can actually start doing valuations on your property based on the overall health of the equipment in the building. We're doing a small experiment in Switzerland at the moment where we're taking that same thinking and asking the question of an insurance company, if I can prove the asset health and maintenance of the equipment, what does it do to my fire insurance? Because now I can prove that I have healthy equipment that's well maintained. So we start moving away from a very linear thought process that goes, hey guys, I'm going to put in a piece of technology and it's going to do this one thing. 2, I'm going to adopt technology to change how we operate and get to a point where we do something new.
Sadara is one of the largest privately owned consultancy in the world. The technology that we have here helps us optimize the space and the operations of the building through having everything integrated. Owning the data was an absolute necessity for us. That's going to help us improve moving forward, not just from an efficiency, sustainability, but also a user perspective.